Hello everyone and welcome to VLGA Connect. Good to have you with us. Thanks to our sponsors Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Each week we bring you interviews and news from across the sector in Victoria to keep you up to date and have your finger on the pulse, so to speak. On the program today, I'll be catching up with the Ballarat Deputy Mayor Ben Taylor to talk about how the council has managed to deliver a budget with a 0% rate increase. And we talk about some other topical issues as well. Plus, Tony Raunic will be here a little later on with his insights on some recent legal issues, including an arbiter decision at Wyndham, a loss at VCAT for Moorabool Council, and Hume Council's call for greater enforcement powers in relation to dangerous dogs. All of that ahead in this edition of VLGA Connect. But first up, here's some of the week's news in Connect headlines. An arbiter has dismissed an application for a finding of misconduct brought by Wyndham Mayor Mia Shaw against Councillor Robert Zatkowski. The allegation of misconduct related to the forwarding of a letter written to the Minister for Local Government to a third party who then published the content on Facebook, while arbiter Joel Silver described the distribution of the letter as a self-interested exercise. He was not satisfied that misconduct had occurred and the application was dismissed. We'll talk about the implications of that decision a little later with Tony Raunic. Whitehorse City Council is seeking nearly $7 million in additional compensation from the Suburban Rail Link project for a reserve that was compulsorily acquired in 2023. It's taking the matter to the Supreme Court, claiming the true value of the reserve is much higher than the $9.5 million offered by the state government. At issue is the basis of the valuation of the land. Frankston City Council has issued a final warning to a property owner over an unauthorised seawall built along the Olivers Hill beachfront. The council has reportedly given the owner one last chance to remove the construction within 60 days or face prosecution. Bull Oak Shire Council has formalised its frustration with what it describes as a lack of transparency from the Victorian government regarding major energy infrastructure projects. It's passed a motion to formally request better engagement from government ministers and departments following a recent visit by Energy Minister Lily D'Ambrosio. Northern Grampians Shire Council has resolved to oppose the introduction of a proposed renewable energy zone in the region. The council will advocate against the introduction of the zone in its current form, which encompasses extensive areas of prime farming land, and it will press for the rights of occupants to be in charge of their own destiny. Melbourne Lord Mayor Nick Rees is pushing for electoral reform in the City of Melbourne, requesting a review of the 2001 City of Melbourne Act in a letter to Local Government Minister Nick Stakos. A recent Electoral Commission report showed voter participation in Melbourne at just 70%, well below the state average of nearly 84%. A key focus of the proposed review is the controversial rule giving businesses 2 votes in council elections while residents get just 1. And East Gippsland Shire Council has ceased providing insurance coverage for 43 Crown-owned assets, saving ratepayers over $57,000. Other supports, such as annual funding allocations and ground maintenance commitments, will continue. And that's the latest from VLGA Connect News headlines. Very pleased to have with me on VLGA Connect today the Deputy Mayor of the City of Ballarat, Councillor Ben Taylor. Hello, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone who may be watching.
Great to have you here. Of course, you've been around local government a long time. I think you're in your 4th term as a councillor, am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, and previously have served as mayor, but currently deputy.
That's correct. I think I was one of the lucky ones that was the mayor, and then COVID came along. So it was very interesting times, but great experience, and wouldn't look back to take it away at all. So very, very privileged to be mayor at any time, but during that time was really special.
And as I was telling you before we started recording, about 30 years ago, I lived in your ward, in Buninyong ward. I bet it's a little bit different now than it was back then in terms of growth and development.
Absolutely, but still in Buninyong, and if you live there, you know how passionate the community is out there. And now it's grown to the point where we've got a butcher and we've got a baker. We just haven't got the candlestick maker, but we've got everything else. And about now, I think we're up to 5 coffee shops, which is always a good thing. and we do have challenges in that as we've got an ageing demographic. How do we manage then the housing that's out there, as well as also maintaining the infrastructure, but also schools. The schools numbers are dropping as we're trying to meet that demand, because it's a place which is sought after to live. The demographic is where the people with the money, the elderly demographic, are able to buy in and then maybe force out some of the younger generation.
Yeah, but it is a beautiful part of the world. Ben, what I particularly wanted to talk to you about today was the budget that your council has recently passed. It's, I stand to be corrected, but I think the only one in this 25-26 year that I've seen that has managed to deliver a 0% increase. So I want to talk about the process that went into delivering that. Is that the first time Ballarat's had a 0% average rate increase?
No, we actually did do it through COVID as well.
Right.
And I think at that time we may have been one of the few, if one of the onlys, to do it. And at that time, the discussion was around trying to relieve some of the pressures that were out there around costs. And as we look at where we are now in 2025, the cost of living pressures are still, and if not probably worse now than what they've been in a long time. Costs on everything are going up, and going up considerably. We just had that announcement, what was it, yesterday, around interest rates didn't drop, when I think a lot of people thought they would. And that then still keeps that cost of living pressure still there when it comes to paying bills. And rates notice are always one of those items that in the community, people get, I think they get high blood pressure when they see that notice in the mailbox and what they're going to do to how to pay it. So as a new council came in, there was a lot of councillors, when doing campaigning, looked at trying to keep the costs back to the ratepayers down, but also still delivering on services. And that was first and forefront when the councillors who were elected came in, and that pretty well put the case to the senior organisation, the directors and CEO, to say, what can you do to do the best you can to keep those rates down?
So it was unanimous around the table. Everyone agreed that that was the direction you wanted to go. It was just then a matter of working out how you could do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was more of that conversation to say, what does it look like? So the organisation then did the work to say, well, this is what the modelling would be if we looked at 0, if we looked at 1, 2, and up to the cap. So looked at those different options, and then also putting that back to the organisation as a group of councillors and saying, well, we still want to deliver the capital works that we have in place, but also we don't want to reduce any services. What can you do to find those savings within the operational? And that's the big thing. We don't want to have a compounding problem in years to come. We wanted to say, well, how can we look at, instead of the rates going up, well, how about we look at savings to go down to then offset that? And that's what we really look to focus on.
Yeah, I guess that compounding thing is something I want to sort of dig into a bit with you, because the conventional belief is if you freeze it this year, you're actually going to pay for that more in the ensuing years because you've lost the benefit of this year's increase, and the operational savings you only get to experience once. So how do you balance those issues against the longer term needs of your community?
Yeah, and in saying that, though, the operational needs as well, if we're able to provide those savings now, as long as they can continue those savings, then you still have that compound goes the other way as well. So that's where I'm looking at it to go, we're not finding we're having huge concerns when we've got future budgets. If we've got those savings, and the worst case scenario is we've just found our $4 to $5 million savings in the budget in the operational, you don't add 10 million next year in relation to additional costs. It should then actually stay that and keep those savings in place. So when looking at that, I could see for myself personally is that it doesn't have a great compounding effect in years to come because we've got that offset in place.
So that $5 million in savings, do you think the community will notice that in any way?
No, because what the organisation was very clear that they didn't want to do it, and councillors were very clear we didn't want to see any changes to service at all. But what the officers were able to do is even do a bit of a combination of some service delivery and how they managed it internally, and also then how to manage those operational costs. And one big one is even about staffing, how we actually report that staffing and managing it from a dollar point of view. And as an organisation, as the City of Ballarat, we've got around about 1,000 staff that are there, and a budget of nearly close to $300 million. Finding the savings was able to be done and able to manage that within the budget, which is good. And in saying that, we're able to look at other things that we could prioritise. And one was we had a lot of councillors in areas where footpaths needed to be a priority. So how do we increase that budget? So we've added another 600,000 to footpaths, and even another 600,000 to cost of living initiatives, with some rebates to low income, the single pensioner rebate. Library hours extending, one of the big ones, and again, this is just a balance, is a couple of the pools that we have, we're going to actually have free entry to them as well.
Right.
So, and that meant, because of the cost of running them versus the income coming in, well, in the end, when you look at a big budget, we can look at little things that make a difference to those individuals in trying to reduce the cost and people utilise the services.
Yeah, so there's a range of things there that you're doing that recognise the cost of living crisis for people, and they're things that you're hoping you'll be able to maintain over the longer term, I guess?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So with we added a new rebate for low income for healthcare holders. So that was a $120 rebate. And then we increased that single household pensioner rebate up to 120 as well. So they're little things, and again, it does add a cost to the bottom line, but we see that as especially those people that are affected more in that lower income as well as vulnerable. So trying to provide something for them.
Were these changes flagged in your longer term financial plan, Ben, the 10-year plan, or have you had to revisit that?
Because of those savings that are in place that we're offsetting in a sense in relation to the rates, the modelling is pretty well the same. So it hasn't made too much difference when we look at that 10-year modelling. We will be looking at different things as part of our modelling, more around our rating strategy. And as much as we've set that plan for 4 years, we'll review that again annually or next year around how we look at what it means from a rates point of view. And this is probably the biggest challenge that I find, is where the bucket of money is, or the pie, how's that divided across the community, and how we still provide at least that cost for individuals to keep it low, but also we've got to think about businesses as well as farming. What does the cost from a rate in the dollar mean if we don't look at what those percentages are? Yeah.
Sure. Have you had any feedback from the community about this approach?
A little bit, not too much. Most of it's been positive. I think probably the sad thing for me, and we're getting up to then the fourth term, as you said, is there's some people that are heavily invested in the budget, but sadly the majority of the community aren't. So when we look at submissions, we're talking of a population of 125,000. We're getting 50 people providing submissions. Right. In relation to the night of the budget, where we're struggling to get anyone to come along to be part of the meeting, and even anyone to put submissions in as part of it. So, and that's the biggest challenge that we have, is how do we communicate to the community around what we're doing, but also around what the implications are from a positive, but also from a negative that may happen to people, especially when they get their rates notice.
Yeah, and not a unique problem to Ballarat, of course, that level of engagement in these not very sexy topics, of course, until people realise that it may or may not impact them. Did you get some pushback to this approach? I imagine the executives were probably a little concerned.
They were pretty good in the end, and it's good that they provide the different modelling. They understand that when it comes to this, they put the information up, and then they provide advice and work through those options. So we did a lot of conversations around this and a lot of briefings around to managing it. And probably the hardest thing being a new council is bringing the understanding of what this means to the new councillors, and also what levels you've got to move around as a council. You can't direct officers to do certain things. All we can do is provide those overarching areas to look at and then work from there. But really, there's been good community feedback back around it. But a couple of councillors were reserved because even though we have a zero, so we've got no change in relation to the overall rates we collect from it. Sadly, though, as we know in the industry, is every resident has a valuation put against it that could go up or down. So I think that the figure was around 60% of residents will see a decrease in relation to their rates. from last year to this year, and then 40% will see an increase. So it doesn't mean it's the same as what it was last year to this year. And that's the hard thing that we have, is trying to get that message out. And as much as we might do all the hard work and come up with a fantastic budget and try to do all these things for the community, when it comes down to an individual opening their rates notice, that's when they'll say, wait a second, it's gone up, or oh, it's gone down. So it's a real challenge in local government to try to manage individuals' expectations.
So true. It's such a complex issue, and it's been around for a long time. And as you rightly point out, it's that word average that people tend to miss when you see the headline about the 0% average rate increase. And of course, on top of that, Ben, this year, there's going to be the increased ESV fund levy on the notice. Have you noticed rural councils Victoria have designed a rate notice with big red boxes to make it very clear which is the state government required fee to be collected? Are you looking at something similar at Ballarat?
Absolutely. We just had a quick look at a draft notice last night, and very similar. And that was something that the councillors put to the organisation as well, to come up with a notice that can highlight what is the state government charges. And as you said, we are very similar. We have a red box with saying, here is the state government charge. It is a real challenge for that. We're going to see about $6.5 million come out of our ratepayers to go to that levy in Ballarat, and that's a lot of money for this financial year coming out, in addition to their normal rates. The sad thing is the community don't know the difference. They don't understand. They look at the total amount, and that's where the challenge as well, off topic a little bit, but also the waste charges. So we have our rates notice, which is the property. We have our waste charges under that. And this year we're going to FOGO. And also then we've got the mandate around glass. That's going to change a cost to ratepayers too. So the hard thing is we're doing all the hard work from a financial point of view, but then there's other things that happen that are included that can affect that bottom line.
Yes, local government's only the master of so many elements of its destiny, isn't it? Ben, right. Before we let you go, what is your message to other councils and councillors who've probably just been through this process and have just felt it is so difficult to deliver a budget within the rate cap, let alone what you've done, a 0% average rate increase? What would your advice to be them in future years about that process?
I think it comes down to every council is going to be different. That's the challenge, and that's really probably the hardest question you could ask, is how do you answer it when you've got rural councils that their budgets are very small, and every dollar does count. So for them it comes down to whether you fix a pothole or not can make a big difference to their budget. Some rural councils are running a deficit. I mean, that's a real challenge. They have limits in relation to borrowing. So that's going to be the challenge for them in how they manage that. And there's no easy solution for them. For larger councils, I think there is an opportunity where they should be able to look at what can be done from an organisation point of view around the operational, but then still delivering on a capital and providing those services. So again, we probably sit in a nice sweet spot around, as I said, getting close to that $300 million, the amount of staff. So there is movement that happens. And when you look at other councils, maybe metropolitan councils, they have more opportunities when you look at revenue that may come through car parking and things like that, that there should be some opportunities to look at, well, how can you pass on savings back to the community to ease the cost of living?
Yeah. All right, Ben, it's been great to chat with you. Well done on what you've been able to achieve there. All the best with it for this forthcoming financial year, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, right now, it's great to have Tony Raunic joining us on the program from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors here at VLGA Connect. Tony, good to have you back on the show. How have you been?
Oh, really good, Chris. What's been happening? I got some training with Wyndham Council later today, and Rural Councils Victoria. I'm getting up to Yarrawonga next week, so that'll be exciting to catch up with the rural councils.
Excellent, keeping you busy. I noticed that they've got their annual conference event coming up later in the month. Tony, speaking of Wyndham, we've had an arbiter decision released this week, which has got, I think, some interesting points to note for future reference. Tell us about this one where the Mayor Shaw, brought a complaint against a councillor who'd released some correspondence to a third party, as I understand it, and there was a feeling that might have constituted misconduct, but the arbiter ultimately saw it differently.
Yeah, that's right. The arbiter did see it differently, but I think that there's some really good learnings in here for councillors about, being very careful about making public statements or releasing material publicly or to third parties when it relates to governance and integrity matters. So what happened here was that the application was brought by the Mayor, Mia Shaw, in April of this year against Councillor Robert Zatskowski. And what Robert Zatskowski had done, he'd sent an email to the Minister for Local Government with subject line, notification of correspondence to the Chief Municipal Inspector. And essentially the email contained a letter to the Minister for Local Government saying, I have written to the Chief Municipal Inspector on governance issues. Didn't attach the letter to the Chief Municipal Inspector, didn't set out precisely what those governance issues were, but then forwarded to the President of Council Watch a copy of that email and letter to the Minister. And Council Watch ultimately on its Facebook page, repeated the facts and mentioned, that Councillor Zatskowski had written this letter about governance and integrity matters to the Chief Municipal Inspector. So Councillor Shaw, who brought the application, argued that there was a breach of the Model Councillor Code of Conduct in that Councillor Zatskowski had brought discredit upon Wyndham Council, acted to diminish the public's trust and confidence in council by distributing publicly a letter that alleged that there were governance and integrity issues at the council. Now, as you say, the arbiter found that there wasn't misconduct, but certainly found Councillor Zatskowski's behaviour to be problematic. And if I can just quote, the arbiter said, with respect, I struggle to see how Councillor Zatskowski's distribution of his letter was not a self-interested exercise designed to raise his public standing at the expense of his fellow councillors. And I can understand that his colleagues would see his unilateral actions as an implicit criticism that Councillor Zatskowski alone was taking governance seriously. So in other words, the arbiter also found that, look, there are specialist agencies about to examine allegations of lack of integrity, lack of appropriate governance at councils, and for a councillor to go and raise publicly allegations along those lines prior to that investigating authority, in this case the Chief Municipal Inspectorate, prior to them completing their investigations, that would likely be inconsistent with the Model Councillor Code of Conduct. However, in this case, as a matter of substance, quoting again, as a matter of substance, the arbiter said there was no breach because the letter that was released didn't contain any specific allegations, was merely a reference to the fact that Councillor Zatskowski had raised concerns with the Chief Municipal Inspectorate. So I think the implications of the decision for councillors across the sector are that, if a councillor was to go public with allegations of lack of good governance or lack of integrity at council without first referring the matter to the relevant authority, allowing that relevant authority to investigate and make findings, then that would likely be misconduct. There's a process mapped out in the Local Government Act. There are appropriate authorities for these things to be brought to, and just going public will be seen as a self-interested exercise, at least doing that prior to the investigating authority considering the matter and making findings.
Yes, so instructive in that sense, Tony. I guess we should mention, and you've been quoted in the press recently about this, I guess a devil's advocate might say, well, the inspectorate and the integrity agencies more generally have been raising concerns about being underfunded and can't handle the work on their plate. Now, a councillor might say, well, what's going to happen to it if I have real concerns? Will it be addressed?
it's a horrible conundrum we're in, isn't it? And I think one can speculate that perhaps if Councillor Zatkowski had have waited a reasonable period of time for an outcome, and then perhaps gone public when we felt it hadn't been dealt with, within an adequate period of time, maybe there would have been a different outcome. But yeah, we are, as a sector, we're in a really difficult position here with underfunded oversight authorities, and it just sheds more light on the fact that we just desperately need that funding to arrive.
Yeah, so we're referring to some recent press on the Inspectorate and the Ombudsman about the level of funding, or what they would say was a reduction of funding over recent years to do their work. Tony, we've got a bit more to get through, so let's go to Hume Council, which has been in the news over some calls for more enforcement power to deal with dangerous dogs. You've had a look at what's happened here and what the council is actually asking for.
Yeah. So firstly, it's not unusual for there to be dog attacks, and there's something we're very familiar with, that councils deal with these. But these recent calls by Hume Council for more powers arise from a particular incident that I think it's worth looking into, and that was an incident in Sunbury in late August of last year, and 3 dogs escaped a property in Sunbury on a Thursday, it was, in August, and attacked a 71-year-old lady on a residential street. She was knocked to the ground, suffered serious injuries to various parts of her body. Now, the very next day, the same group of dogs escaped the same premises, this time attacking other people, including a mum with her baby in a pram. Mum managed to protect the baby, but she was attacked and indeed seriously injured, rushed to the Royal Melbourne Hospital with serious injuries. Now, we have these 2, multiple attacks over consecutive days by the same dogs escaping the same premises. So there was significant media coverage and some public angst along the lines of, well, why was the second incident allowed to occur? Why didn't the relevant council officers go and, on the Thursday after the first attack, seize those dogs from the premises? And understandably, there was a notice of motion by councillors at the next council meeting after this incident, indeed in September of 2024, calling for a report into what had happened. Had the appropriate processes been followed? Was there adequate, response systems at council? And that report came out, was released at the ordinary council meeting in June of this year, Chris. And some key findings of that review were that indeed council officers had acted appropriately at the time. They were just heavily constrained by these limited powers of entry that they have under the Domestic Animals Act. So currently, officers were constrained from entering that private premises and removing the dogs, if you like, making the public safe, despite the prior incident. And so the call that's come out of that review is for there to be amendments to the Domestic Animals Act to actually empower council authorised officers to enter private premises, remove a dangerous animal only where there's a reasonable belief that that animal's been involved in a serious attack.
That last point's important, isn't it? Because some of the media coverage recently tried to paint it as if the council wanted its officers to have a carte blanche ability to enter private property and seize, but it is only under extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, and I think any reasonable person, including animal lovers, would say it's absolutely appropriate where there's been evidence of reasonable belief of serious injury, attack, that there be people beyond just the police, who we know are very occupied with other matters, allow these trained animal welfare officers, trained officers at council used to handling animals, to enter premises and remove an animal in those circumstances. And certainly, if that power had have existed, one would think that there wouldn't have been that second incident and that serious injury, and no doubt, mental health damage to the people as well who've been subject to those attacks. What I like about this story, Chris, is that that after this sort of incident became public, a number of neighbouring councils, other councils across the sector, contacted the City of Hume, talking about a shared interest in there being expanded powers for authorised officers at council. And City of Hume actually called a forum in April of this year where there were multiple representatives from councils across the state to discuss this. And the council, City of Hume, have announced that at the forthcoming MAV State Council in October of this year, they'll be proposing a motion that again calling on the state government to introduce relevant sort of statutory reforms here. And one would think that they'll get considerable support across the sector. So out of, a tragic, sad incident, unfortunately no one was killed, but, certainly serious injury and trauma, something good, I think, may well arise if the state government act upon this. One would think that they would.
I was going to ask what you thought about the likelihood of them acting on that and acquiescing to this request.
Yeah, well, I think, as I say, I think a reasonable person would say that this isn't a carte blanche, as you say, for officers to enter premises just on on any odd complaint.
Yeah.
This is in relation to where there's been serious injury. There's a reasonable belief that it's necessary, I guess, to protect public health and safety. And it's not a case of, I think maybe you've got an illegal pergola in the backyard, or are you complying with a planning permit? We're going to just enter your premises without warning. It's not something like that I think has been portrayed in the media.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the inside scoop on what's happening there, Tony. And one last one. When we last spoke, we knew that Moorabool Shire was headed to VCAT. They were taking on the EPA over an illegal dumping issue there that they were arguing the EPA was aware of and should have taken some action about, rather than having it fall on the council and ratepayers. And the warning at the time from the Moorabool Mayor was this could have implications more broadly across the sector. We've got the outcome now. Moorabool lost the case, didn't they? What are your takeaways from this?
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, so what Moorabool was seeking was a stay on an environment action notice that the EPA had issued against Moorabool Council. And we're now able to get some more of the facts from the VCAT decision on that stay application. And really interesting set of facts. There are 2 trailer loads of acetylene cylinders on a nature strip in Merrimoo in Moorabool Shire. And what had occurred was that the EPA had been actively monitoring a storer of waste and in terms of their, what they were doing with their used industrial waste. And when that waste was dumped on a nature strip, decided to, pursue the landowner, the council, and issue a notice for the council to conduct the cleanup. Council took the matter to VCAT, saying, look, we think that this is a breach of the EPA statutory duties, because the EPA had this activity under active surveillance and investigation, and, very clearly the council wasn't the source of the illegal dumping. They weren't the storer of the waste. Why is the council being hit up for this? And indeed, the CEO of Moorabool Council, Derek Madden, swore an affidavit that was submitted to the court saying that, the community's being asked to bear the cost of rectifying a situation that stems from the EPA's failure to manage this site that was within its knowledge and oversight. So what VCAT said is, council's in an invidious position here. Council's inherently exposed to notices such as this by virtue of its control of public land, including roads under council control and management. And interestingly, VCAT actually asked the council representative at the hearing, how would you clean this up? What arrangements are there in place if council had to clean this up? And council said, look, there's one facility across the entire state that receives this form of industrial waste, and it will cost $500,000. We've got a quote, $500,000 for this site to receive these acetylene cylinders. Acetylene it's a particular type of gas. It's used in welding, for example. And these cylinders aren't like your normal gas cylinder for a gas barbecue or such you might have at home. They contain a sort of an area where there's a porous mix of potentially asbestos.
Oh, really?
So could be quite dangerous. Now,
how big are they, Tony? How big is one of these cylinders?
Well, I can tell you that there's between 1,000 and 1,250 of these cylinders by the side of the road at Moorabool, and council have not just taken no action. Council have put barrier cones around the site. The EPA has installed, I believe, CCTV cameras to monitor, if anyone came to the site, maybe trying to set fire to the cylinders or cause damage that might be an incident. But the EPA was minded that it felt that there was an immediate risk to public health. And VCAT agreed that there was this immediate risk that, for example, there might be a vehicle run off the road and hit the cylinders. There might be some arson incident, etc. There could cause some, leakage of this dangerous material. The EPA was also minded that ultimately, if the actual polluter was identified and discovered, council could take action to recover its costs under that polluter pays principle. Now, that of course assumes that the polluter's got $500,000, that they're pecunious, and also council would have to prove that. So I actually think that this is a bit similar to our initial story, talking about cost shifting, if you like, and we talked about the LGI not having sufficient funds. We might want to blame the EPA here and understand. I think the sector is angry, and the mayor, Paul Tatchell, has come out and said that EPA has played past the parcel here and pointed out that $500,000 in Moorabool terms is $25 per ratepayer in the Shire. That's pretty significant.
It is.
But what I'd say is that I think that the EPA is just another statutory authority who's had been having to pay dividends to the state government. But the Victorian, government balance sheet and budget, as we know, is in dire circumstances, incomparable to anywhere else across the state. So a lot of these authorities, like the old Rural Roads Victoria, Vic Roads, EPA, are being required to pay more and more of their dividends to the state government. And so they're avoiding expenditure where possible. And of course, it's being passed down to the sector. And this is just another example. But I really feel for the people of Moorabool who, $500,000 would be such a, imagine the capital works that could be done in Ballan, Bacchus Marsh, that sort of area.
It's a big component of their budget, isn't it? I think, as Mayor Tatchell said, it's unjust. I think it sucks, to be honest. And, it's hard to see, how this is going to come out any differently. How many potential polluters could there be that use these cylinders, is exercising my mind? There wouldn't be too many, surely.
Well, one would think that it would be capable of tracking down. I mean, I think the vehicles have a registration number. I think there are actual trailers sitting by the side of the road. But
Okay.
that it might sound simple, but let me say I've acted for councils in these instances. City of Greater Geelong come to mind recently on a matter that we've acted, and it's been a long process to obtain that indemnity or that refund from the polluter.
Yeah.
Proving that they're the polluter is one thing, but then typically they're dumping the pollutant because they don't have the money to send it to the correct methods of disposal. They may well not have the money to pay. So it's no good if you're pursuing someone who ultimately doesn't have the money to pay the fine or to pay you whatever you're awarded.
You'd question if they're a company and this is part of them doing business. You'd question their business model if this is part of that, wouldn't you? Because I'm assuming from what you've said that it would have also cost them $500,000 to have disposed of this material, which is exhibit number one as to why they'd be thinking we'll get away with dumping this if we can.
And one facility across the state, to take this. Chris, you're not in a position to bargain, are you, about the price in instances like that? So look, we of course hope that Moorabool will be able to pursue this polluter and able to recover. Maybe there's some insurance element, and an insurance company can step in and cover the costs, but that remains to be seen, and there'll be further expense in pursuing along those lines. And one would hope that the EPA is actively assisting that process, given its apparent knowledge of what's occurred here.
So illegal dumping is a hot issue now, particularly around those fringe council areas that have lots of rural areas, and they're seeing contractors dumping materials when they've come into the Shire for work, etc., before they leave, and it's becoming a real issue. It sort of feels like we're going to have CCTV cameras everywhere to catch these people in the act.
It's really difficult, and as I say, there are those known dumping sites where councils do put in cameras and these sorts of and signs and warnings that places are monitored. But you're right.
But then they just find somewhere else.
They do, so, there's a certain road I drive on through one of those outer council areas behind my place when I'm travelling to the country, and it's a matter of every couple of 100 metres, loads have been dumped, and I really feel for that particular municipality. It's Mitchell Shire in that instance, but seemingly. It's not just businesses, but people in more built-up areas are choosing to, hook up their load, drive it 45 minutes north or south or east or west till they get to an area where it's seen as a sort of a quiet road, and things are being dumped. It's very sad.
It is, or even just driving three doors down, as we'll hear. Mary Agostino's coming on the show in the next few weeks. They've got a dob in a dumper campaign going in Mitchell, and I've spoken to Mary about that, and some interesting stories to tell there. A hot topic at this moment. Thank you for those insights. So there's been a bit happening, Tony. Great to catch up with you and hear your thoughts on all of those. I wonder what will land on your desk next. Never fear, whatever it'll be, you'll be back to tell us about it in the next few weeks.
Oh, well, it's exciting, Chris. It keeps us going, doesn't it?
It sure does. Thank you, Tony. All the best, and thanks to you and the team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers for your ongoing support of VLGA Connect. We'll see you soon. Before we leave you today, a quick word from the VLGA about mandatory training for councillors. No matter the size or location, all councils can participate in a special councillor professional development intensive series being provided by the VLGA. You can partner with 3 other councils and save more than 50% off the minimum cost of completing all 13 modules in year 1. The intensives will be held over 3 days. They're cost-effective, time-efficient, and promote the benefits of peer-to-peer and face-to-face learning. In addition to the intensives, And in recognition that every council has different needs, the VLGA is also offering bespoke training options, both online and in person. A faculty of facilitators will work with you to customise a program that responds directly to the unique professional development needs of your council and delivered in a way which suits you. Find out more by chatting to the team at VLGA. You can email them or head to the website www.vlga.org.au. That's our show for this week. My thanks to Ben Taylor, the Deputy Mayor of Ballarat, and to Tony Raunic for their contributions to this episode. And thanks to the team at Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors of VLGA Connect. We'll be back next week with much more. Until then, bye for now.